August 25, 1944, northern France. The early dawn mist still clung to the hedgerows as diesel engines roared across the empty plains. In the grey half-light, a convoy of olive-drab trucks rolled west to east, miles of them. Headlights blacked out, tires grinding dust and broken glass into the road. To the Germans retreating from the Falaise pocket, it seemed impossible. Days ago they had bombed every bridge, mined every road, scorched every fuel dump. Yet somehow American tanks were still coming, faster, hungrier, unstoppable. U.S. Army After Action Report, AUG 1944. The men in those trucks were not frontline soldiers. They were mechanics, cooks, clerks, men who'd never fired a rifle in anger. But they were about to become the single most important fighting force in General George S. Patton's Third Army. Their weapon was not a gun, but motion itself, the ceaseless rhythm of supply. Each hour brought new dust clouds on the horizon, columns of Studebakers, GMC Jimmies, and Dodge 2.5s, loaded high with 5-gallon jerry cans, ration crates and ammunition belts. The road ahead shimmered with heat and tension. Every mile closer to the front meant a mile deeper into chaos. Transportation Corps Report, Sept 1944. Patton's tanks, the spearhead of the breakout from Normandy, had outpaced their supply lines. His armored divisions could strike at will, but only as long as their engines ran. Fuel was life. And in August 1944, the American advance was bleeding it faster than anyone had imagined possible. Each Sherman burned a gallon every 2 miles. Each armored column required over 400,000 gallons a day. U.S. Army Quartermaster Summary, 1945. The German High Command had laughed at the idea that the Americans could sustain such speed. For all their industrial might, logistics, they believed, was a fragile thing. Chains of trucks stretched thin over ruined roads. The Americans advance with the arrogance of unlimited fuel, wrote a staff officer from the Wehrmacht's 7th Army. Cut their lines, and they die on the road. Bundesarchiv 7th Army War Diary, AUG 1944. But the Germans didn't yet understand what was happening behind those rolling clouds of dust. They didn't see the system that had been born in the chaos of Normandy, engineered by ingenuity, discipline, and desperation, the Red Ball Express. Its name came from a railroad term, Red Ball, meaning priority freight. Its emblem, a crimson circle painted on trucks, meant one thing: no delays. When a Red Ball convoy hit the road, everything else pulled over. The men drove day and night, through rain, mud, and sniper fire, their trucks marked with that red disk of urgency. U.S. Transportation Command Archives. The convoy began in the quiet coastal ports, Cherbourg, Omaha Beach, Utah, where Liberty ships unloaded an endless tide of supplies. From there, the Red Bull route ran like an artery across the heart of France, a one-way system stretching 700 miles, reserved exclusively for logistics. 2 lanes, one for loaded trucks, one for empty returns. Every bridge guarded, every crossing patrolled. Engineer Corps Field Log, Sept 1944. It was not planned, it was improvised. Major General John C.H. Lee, the often controversial head of U.S. Army Services of Supply, authorized the operation in less than 36 hours. His engineers surveyed the roads with aerial photos and local maps. His mechanics overhauled every available vehicle. When the first convoy rolled on August 25th, the route was barely marked, the drivers barely trained. Yet it worked. U.S. Army Service Forces Dispatch, 1944. What followed was an achievement so vast that it defied military precedent. Over the next 3 months, the Red Ball Express would deliver more than 400,000 tons of fuel, food, and ammunition, enough to sustain Patton's lightning thrust from Normandy to the German frontier. U.S. European Theater Logistics Report, 1945. But behind the glory lay exhaustion. The drivers, most of them African-American soldiers serving in segregated units, endured brutal hours and constant danger. They slept in ditches, fixed engines under fire, and navigated roads littered with wrecks. German aircraft hunted the convoys by day, ambushes and mines threatened by night, yet they kept moving. "We just kept rolling," one driver later recalled. "If Patton was moving, we had to be moving." Oral History Interview, 514th Truck Regiment, 1951. Their trucks became as familiar to the French countryside as the roar of artillery. Locals remembered the endless lines, canvas tops flapping, engines howling through the villages. Children waved. Farmers pointed to the sky. The Americans were bringing more than supplies. They were bringing momentum. French Resistance Memoir, 1946. Patton himself watched in disbelief as his supply convoys snaked across the landscape. "My tanks can eat gasoline faster than hell," he growled. "But the Red Ball boys, they feed them like it's mother's milk." Third Army Command Journal, Aug. 1944. Still, the pace was unsustainable. Each day, over 6,000 trucks ran the route, consuming vast amounts of their own fuel, nearly 1 gallon for every 2 delivered. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep the fleet alive. Tires shredded, engines overheated, and brakes failed on the long descents of the French hills. Motor Transport Command Report, 1944. Yet the convoy's discipline was iron. Speed limits were posted, 25 mph maximum, but rarely obeyed. Drivers pushed their machines past exhaustion, leaning on horns and headlights as they roared through the darkness. They called it driving by feel. Driver's Field Diary, Sep. 1944. At the head of each column rode a lead jeep carrying a red flag, symbol of the Red Ball itself. Behind it, 50 trucks followed at 60-yard intervals, headlights hooded, windows blackened. The column moved as one, a living thing of rubber and fire, its heartbeat measured in revolutions per minute. Transportation Corps Training Memo, 1944. The Germans, regrouping east of the Seine, couldn't comprehend how the Americans had reappeared so swiftly on their flanks. "They move faster than we can retreat," a German captain wrote after the fall of Chartres. "Every time we believe they must have stopped for lack of fuel, they strike again." Bundesarchiv Captured Officer Interrogation, Sep. 1944. They didn't yet know that the U.S. Army had turned logistics into a weapon, one forged not in the boardrooms of Washington, but on the dirt roads of France, by drivers who refused to stop. Engineers from Detroit Arsenal had already begun sending modifications. Reinforced suspension kits, new carburetors, field repair guides mimeographed on oily paper. Civilian ingenuity met military necessity. Ordnance Department Bulletin, 1944. Each truck became a symbol of American adaptability. Mechanics welded armor plates from scrap. Drivers painted names on fenders. Miss Liberty, Old Betsy, Blitz Baby. The roads themselves became a front line of their own. Photographic section, Signal Corps collection. But for all its daring, the Red Ball Express was a fragile miracle. It depended on human endurance and mechanical luck. A single blown bridge or clogged road could halt a division. The supply system was running on fumes, literally. The Germans were watching, probing, planning their counterstroke. In the east at Metz and Nancy, Patton's tanks were beginning to slow. The rain had come. Roads turned to mud. Fuel was arriving slower, the men sleeping less. The thunder of engines began to falter, and somewhere beyond the Meuse River, the enemy was waiting, ready to test whether America's greatest advantage could hold. The question was no longer whether the Red Ball Express could deliver. It was whether it could survive. The secret lay not in any single truck or driver, but in the machinery of organization, an invisible network of men, machines and mathematics that transformed chaos into momentum. The Red Ball Express was more than a convoy. It was a living system, a logistical heartbeat designed to feed an army that refused to stop moving. U.S. Army Transportation Corps Analysis, OCT 1944. From its earliest hours, the Red Ball Express depended on precision engineering. The trucks themselves, primarily GMC CCKW2 1-2-ton Jimmies, were marvels of wartime standardization. Each stood 21 feet long, weighed 10,000 pounds empty, and could carry a payload of 5,000 more. Its 6-cylinder 270 cubic inch engine produced 104 horsepower, enough to haul through mud or mountain, while its 10-wheel drive system gave it traction that could shame even tracked vehicles. Technical Manual TM 9801 1944. But the trucks were only the muscle. The nervous system came from an intricate communications chain. Using newly issued SCR 299 and SCR 399 field radios, dispatchers relayed convoy positions in real time, coordinating traffic flow like air traffic controllers of the battlefield. "Keep the line open. Keep them rolling," was the mantra scrawled on dispatch boards from Cherbourg to Chartres. Signal Corps Communications Log Sep. 1944. This was logistics under fire. Bridges destroyed by retreating Germans were rebuilt overnight by engineer battalions using Bailey Bridge kits, portable, modular structures invented by British engineer Donald Bailey. These bridges could span 200 feet and hold the weight of a loaded Sherman tank, assembled in hours under floodlights and artillery fire. Engineer Corps Field Report 1944, behind the steering wheels, over 75% of the drivers were African-American soldiers, drawn from quartermaster and trucking battalions, long relegated to support roles. The 318th, 391st and 514th Truck Regiments became the backbone of the operation. For many, this was their war, not in trenches or tank turrets, but in convoys that never stopped. They were the unsung link between production lines in Detroit and Patton's armored spearhead in Lorraine. Office of the Quartermaster General, 1945. At its peak, the Red Ball Express employed 23,000 drivers and over 6,000 vehicles. The convoys moved on strict schedules, departing every 20 minutes, each carrying 125 tons of supplies. Trucks were loaded by color code: red for gasoline, blue for ammunition, yellow for rations. Every container, every can was mapped to a destination. The system was brutally simple and brutally efficient. Army Service Forces Operational Bulletin, 1944. The men called it the rolling pipeline, and in truth it was. Each GMC truck carried roughly 120 5-gallon jerry cans, each can a lifeline for a tank, jeep or half-track. The cans themselves were copied from the German Wehrmacht's design, reverse-engineered by American engineers for mass production. In 1 month, U.S. factories produced over 19 million of them. War Production Board Memo, 1944, yet no machine could overcome the human toll. The drivers worked 16-hour shifts, often sleeping in their seats. Brakes failed on mountain descents. Engines seized in dust-choked heat. The Red Ball roads, Route Nationale 12 and 24, became graveyards for the unlucky. Trucks overturned, burned or simply abandoned, their cargo stripped by desperate locals or strafed by Luftwaffe fighters. Transportation Corps Field Loss Report, Sept. 1944. By late August, the Red Ball Express had become indispensable. Every mile it advanced, Patton's Third Army advanced with it. On September 1st, the spearhead reached Verdun, 160 miles beyond supply expectations. German intelligence officers couldn't believe the pace. "We are fighting ghosts," one wrote. "They appear where there is no fuel to reach them." Bundesarchive, 3rd Panzer Army War Diary, Sept. 1944. Then came the test, the Battle of Aracourt. September 18, 1944. Dawn broke under low clouds over the rolling fields of Lorraine. 2 armored divisions clashed amid fog so thick that tank commanders could barely see beyond 50 yards. Patton's 4th Armored Division, short on ammunition and fuel, faced the German 5th Panzer Army, newly re-equipped with Panther tanks. The American front was stretched thin, exposed and dangerously low on gasoline. U.S. 3rd Army Combat Chronicle, 1945. That morning, 200 Red Ball trucks were already en route, their engines straining uphill through the rain. Each was loaded with 80-octane fuel and 75mm shells for the Shermans holding the line. "The Germans are coming, and we're the only ones who can feed the guns," one driver noted in his diary. 514th Truck Regiment Journal, Sept. 1944. The road to Aracourt was chaos. Shell craters, burning wrecks and collapsed bridges turned every mile into a gamble. When one bridge over the Seine River gave way, engineers rebuilt it in 6 hours, using a prefabricated Bailey span while the Red Ball convoys idled in silence. By dusk, the trucks rolled again, headlights covered, wipers squealing against rain. Engineer Course Action Log, 1944. As the Panthers advanced through the fog, American artillery fired until their barrels glowed red. At 0430 hours, the first Red Bull convoy reached the front. Fuel drums were rolled straight into the mud, tapped by hand pumps into tank reservoirs, while enemy shells burst overhead. A supply sergeant recorded, "We fueled them under fire. There was no choice." Quartermaster Depot Memo, 1944. With their tanks refueled, the Americans struck back. The 37th Tank Battalion ambushed the German columns at 400 yards, firing from hull-down positions in the fog. Panthers erupted in flame, their silhouettes vanishing behind smoke. By nightfall, 88 German tanks were destroyed, against 25 American losses. The tide had turned not just by tactics but by supply. After Action Report 4th Armored Division, Sept 1944, the Germans were stunned. They had assumed the American offensive was collapsing for lack of logistics. Yet, like a conjuring trick, new fuel and shells kept arriving. "We cannot understand how their supply continues," a German major reported. "They fight without pause, as if their columns are endless." Bundesarchiv Officer Interrogation File, Oct. 1944. Behind that illusion stood mechanics and dispatchers who never saw the front line. In Cherbourg and Le Mans, depot crews worked around the clock repairing axles, patching radiators and rethreading tires. Civilian engineers from Firestone, Goodyear and General Motors had been embedded with the army, advising on field maintenance. They improvised mobile workshops, repair trucks fitted with lathes, welders and spare parts scavenged from wrecks. War Department Technical Bulletin 1944, even the fuel itself was a feat of engineering. American chemists at Standard Oil and the Bureau of Mines had developed high-octane blends resistant to detonation under tank compression. This fuel gave Shermans an extra edge in acceleration, crucial for close-range duels like Aracourt. Fuel Engineering Division Report 1944. Every link in the chain mattered. Radios kept the convoys coordinated. Tire pressure logs ensured efficiency. Engine oil, spark plugs, bearings, each a hidden hero. The logistics staff joked that the trucks fought the war one wrench at a time. But their precision sustained a continental offensive. Transportation Maintenance Field Report 1944. By early October, the Red Ball Express had delivered over 12,500 tons of supplies per day, an achievement unmatched by any military in history. Its efficiency was such that even General Eisenhower's staff began modeling future operations around it. "The Red Ball is our lifeline," one planner wrote. "Lose it and we lose Europe." Chief Logistics Briefing, Oct. 1944. But the cost was rising. Vehicles wore out faster than replacements could arrive. Fuel for the convoys themselves began consuming 10% of total supply. And with every mile gained, the trucks were forced farther from their ports through enemy territory. The strain was showing. Army Motor Transport Review, Oct. 1944. As autumn deepened, the Red Ball Express faced its greatest challenge, not the enemy's fire, but the limits of endurance. Men were breaking down, engines failing, the roads dissolving under endless rain, and in the east, new orders were coming from headquarters, an advance toward the German border, toward the Siegfried Line itself. The question was no longer how fast the Americans could move. It was how much longer the Red Ball Express could keep the entire army alive. By November 1944, the roads of France had turned to rivers of mud. Trucks sank to their axles. Engines coughed and died under the weight of exhaustion. The men of the Red Ball Express had been driving for nearly 3 months without rest, feeding an army that now stretched from the Normandy coast to the German frontier. Hands still, the orders came, keep them moving. U.S. Army Transportation Command Bulletin, Novi 1944. The system that had once roared with efficiency now began to grind under its own momentum. So of the 6,000 trucks that once ran daily, nearly half were down for repairs at any given time. Tires shredded faster than they could be replaced. Mechanics salvaged rubber from wrecks, slicing old tubes into makeshift patches. The smell of burnt oil hung over every depot like smoke after battle. Motor Maintenance Division Report 1944. Yet the Red Ball Express endured. Engineers at ordnance depots retooled factory parts for field fixes. Civilians back home, many of them women, kept the Detroit and Toledo production lines humming, producing axles, carburetors, and drive shafts that were flown in by C-47 transport aircraft. "Every truck that moves is a victory," read a banner over the assembly line at General Motors' Pontiac plant. War Production Board Archive, 1945. In late November, as snow began to fall over the Ardennes, the Red Ball Express reached its operational peak, more than 412,000 tons of supplies delivered since its creation. Patton's tanks had driven nearly 600 miles from Normandy to the German border, fueled entirely by that rolling lifeline. Eisenhower himself called it the artery of victory. Chafe Operations Summary, Deck 1944. But success came at a human cost. More than 200 drivers were killed in accidents or ambushes. Hundreds more were injured, frostbitten, or broken by fatigue. Many were buried by the roadside where they had fallen, their trucks still marked with the red circle of the express. For the African-American drivers who made up the backbone of the operation, the burden was doubled, fighting not only exhaustion and enemy fire, but the prejudice of their own army. "We were invisible," one veteran said years later, "until they needed gas." Oral History, 514th Truck Regiment, 1950. Still, they persevered. They named their trucks after movie stars and hometown girls, painted slogans on the sides: "No load too heavy, hell on wheels, Red Bull or bust." Between the lines of segregation and survival, a quiet pride grew. Every successful convoy was proof that courage came in many forms. Signal Corps photo log, Deck 1944. The German High Command never fully grasped what it was facing. They measured war in divisions and tonnage, not in the heartbeat of supply. To them, the idea that an army could sustain such a rapid advance over hundreds of miles of destroyed infrastructure was madness. Yet interrogation reports after the war revealed the shock. "We believed their supply must fail," said General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army. "It did not. That was our greatest error." U.S. Army Interrogation Summary, 1946. The Red Ball Express proved that modern war was not decided solely by firepower, but by movement, by the ability to keep the machine of war alive. For every tank that fired, 10 trucks had carried its fuel, its shells, its food. For every mile advanced, 100 mechanics had turned wrenches through the night to make it possible. U.S. Army Logistics Division Report, 1945. When winter descended and the Battle of the Bulge erupted in December, the Red Ball Express was finally retired. Its routes, once glowing with convoys, fell silent under the snow. New longer supply lines took its place, White Ball, Green Diamond, and others, but none would match its speed or legend. The Red Ball had done its job. It had carried Patton's Third Army to the doorstep of Germany. European Theatre Transportation Summary, Jan 1945. In the months that followed, historians and officers alike tried to calculate the true scale of what had been achieved. More than 23,000 men, 6,000 vehicles, and 75 million gallons of fuel had moved across France on roads never meant to bear such weight. The convoys had averaged one truck every 50 seconds along the route, an unbroken chain of steel and sweat. Transportation Statistical Summary, 1946. But the deeper legacy was psychological. For the soldiers at the front, the sound of a Red Bull convoy rumbling through the night was the sound of reassurance. It meant the offensive would continue. It meant they would not be abandoned. Third Army Morale Report, Deck 1944. The Germans heard it too, and to them it was despair. Post-war interviews with Wehrmacht survivors speak of disbelief, even resignation. "We could not match their speed," one panzer officer recalled. "Every day they seemed to grow stronger while we grew weaker. We fought men who never stopped." Bundesarchiv interview transcript, 1946. Behind the headlines of victory, the engineers and planners who had made it possible quietly returned home. Men like Major General John C.H. Lee, whose logistical vision had created the Express in a single day, Colonel Loren A. Ayers, who coordinated convoy schedules with mathematical precision, and the countless field engineers who built roads and bridges faster than the enemy could destroy them. Their genius was not in invention, but adaptation, turning civilian machinery into military power. Army Service Forces Engineering Memo, 1945. Their lessons would outlive the war. The Red Ball Express became the blueprint for every major American logistical operation to come, from the Berlin Airlift to Operation Desert Storm. Its principles, redundancy, mobility and continuous flow, were studied at West Point, the Pentagon and NATO command schools for decades. U.S. Army Logistics Doctrine Review, 1952. Even in the space age, its echo remained. The convoys had shown that speed and communication could conquer distance, that control of supply meant control of strategy. "Wars are won by the side that keeps moving," wrote General Omar Bradley after the war. The Red Ball kept us moving. Bradley, A Soldier's Story, 1951. For the men who lived it, the memory was more visceral. They remembered the stink of gasoline, the scream of tires on wet pavement, the blinding fatigue. They remembered sleeping under trucks, eating from ration tins and watching the headlights ahead vanish into fog. And they remembered the pride because they knew without them, Patton's tanks would have gone silent. Veterans Affairs Interview Collection, 1960. In France, long after the war, villagers still spoke of the convoys that thundered through their towns. They came like a river, one recalled. A river of trucks that never stopped. French Oral History Project, 1974. Today, memorial stones mark their path. Simple plaques along Route Nationale 24, engraved with a red circle and a name, Red Ball Express, 1944. Its story endures not because of glory, but because of truth. It proved that victory in modern war depends as much on the courage to sustain as the courage to fight. The drivers, the engineers, the mechanics, they fought with wrenches, with willpower, with wheels. In the face of exhaustion, they kept rolling. U.S. Army Historical Division, 1948. And when the guns finally fell silent, one Red Ball driver was asked what it all meant. He paused, looked at the horizon, and said simply, "We kept them moving, and they kept freedom moving with them." In the end, the Red Ball Express was more than a convoy. It was America's heartbeat across a broken continent, a pulse of steel, sweat, and courage that turned the tide of war. Because in the crucible of 1944, when German generals laughed at the impossibility of American logistics, they didn't yet understand the truth. Speed could be a weapon, supply could be a strategy, and motion, unceasing, unbroken, unstoppable, could win a world.